Good morning, Dr. Paul Healy, Executive Director. I'm here with our Assistant Executive Director, Dr. Eschbach as well. Good morning, Eric.
Morning, Paul. How are you?
Good. So we're going to do our weekly webinar again. And so I thought today we'll do latest news out of PDE, which was kind of a little bit of a bombshell for us. Talk about liability a little bit today, Eric, because that seems to be the question we're getting the most
Hot topic.
from
Very hot
school
topic.
leaders. And then I thought maybe if you could share things on what's happening legislatively on the national front
Sure.
and the state front.
Good.
So let's jump into PDE. It's been a little bit silent except for the big news that hit that our Secretary Rivera is leaving the Department of Education once the fall school year gets underway. He's actually going to be, he was named president of Thaddeus Stevens College of Technology in Lancaster. It is a huge loss to the Department of Education. He came from the ranks as superintendent. He understood the plight of school leaders and school districts, and he really got it and assembled a good team of people over there at PDE. And we've had a great relationship with Secretary Rivera and his entire team. So that's a huge loss for the department going forward, but a great opportunity for Pedro as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
And if you didn't hear, the recommendation from the governor is the Deputy Secretary for Higher Education, Post-Secondary Education, Noah Ortega, will be the recommendation. And we'll have to go through that process of being vetted and everything and then approved by the legislation.
And all of a sudden, a challenge for those of us in K-12 not having the expertise of someone like Dr. Rivera, who was definitely really ingrained in K-12.
Yeah, and I'm sure that he's going to ensure that it's going to be an easy transition, you know, as he departs, to make sure that the things that he put in place continues, especially during the COVID-19. So, but great news for him. What a great guy that he's been there. How many years now?
5 years.
5 years.
Pretty long for a Secretary of Education, believe it or not.
Yeah, so we wish him well as he goes forward as well. So let's jump into liability because we've been getting this question a lot, and there's not a lot of answers, formal answers out there. It's just a lot of speculation. So, you know, I guess I'll start with saying that, you know, some people think that we don't want to get back to school, but I can tell you that school leaders and teachers alone, they want to be with kids, and they know that face-to-face instruction is the ideal form of instruction, and they are doing everything under their power to really make that happen for the fall. However, as they're engaged in this extensive planning, you know, with their communities, and they're back of their minds, they're worried about COVID-19 and the liability issues that could surface as a result of that.
Well, sure. I mean, it's just that whole legal aspect of, do my actions, could they translate into something that could cost me money or cost me a job?
Yeah, and we all know we're in a litigious society right now, and the concern is whether districts will be sued if someone catches the virus going forward. And I will say, you know, after reading a lot about what other states are doing, I kind of did a search today. Pennsylvania is not alone in this regard. And other states some states have already addressed this through legislation. So going forward, certainly we've been one of the organizations that has been pushing for legislation, either at the national or the local level, and hopefully something will come about for this. But just to let you know what some other states are doing. Idaho right now is considering legislation to protect the school districts from any suits. Alabama, way back in March, already issued a proclamation protecting both businesses and state agencies against legal claims unless a plaintiff can show evidence that there was reckless, willful, or intentional misconduct that occurred. Now, that's going to be the test going forward. Sure. Did you do everything in your power? That's the test for us right now for liability.
Well, sure. I mean, as a school district, to be held liable for something, you have to, there has to be something that is amiss, a dangerous situation, and you have to know that it's there. I always use the example of, if the roof of a porch falls down on someone, you have to know that there was damage to that roof, and you have to have neglected to fix that damage. So this is kind of a stretch with COVID-19, but a legitimate concern.
Yeah. So, and again, as I said, Arizona is another state. They actually tried to pass some similar legislation like Alabama did, but it didn't pass through the legislative process for whatever reason. So it's going to be very interesting to follow this through the legislative process. And I will say, on the other hand, the insurance companies, this is new territory for them as well. And they're scrambling to try to think about how do you write a policy for that. So I thought what I would do is to share, while you're talking with your administrative teams about getting back to school and COVID-19, you might want to ask some specific questions kind of going forward, and a district can reach out to their own insurance carrier and say, so what happens in these cases? So I'm going to share my screen real quick.
As Paul pulls that up, just know that right now in Pennsylvania, there are several hearings taking place at the House and the Senate level. And in all of those hearings, the education organizations, one of their top concerns is that we do something to address the issue of liability. So this is a hot topic in Pennsylvania, and it's being addressed at the legislative committee level. We'll see if it gets any further.
Yeah, so I just put these up here because as I was searching different sites, I found these questions to be very interesting ones, and ones that can not be completely answered right now. So, but ones that you should be bringing up as a school leader kind of going forward. So the first one is, and I'm going to go to my screen here, so excuse my side profile here. Sure. Can I and my administrative team be held liable for failure to enforce the recommended safety guidelines? And when they're talking about the recommended safety guidelines, they're talking about either state and or CDC guidelines. And I guess the biggest factor in this that we're hearing is the 6 feet thing. And there's been so much debate about that, where we heard, is 6 feet? Do we have to do 6 feet? What if we did 3 feet, and what happens? And if there's not 6 feet and somebody catches it, are we liable? And some districts have come out and said, we cannot do the 6 feet, and have totally decided to go to online learning right now because of this issue alone.
Sure, and the state guidelines say to the greatest extent possible, as do the CDC.
Yeah.
And of course that's a gray area.
Right.
What is the greatest extent possible?
Right. And I think Pennsylvania's recommendation is still 6 feet.
It is.
It's still 6 feet. And here's another one. Can I be held liable for inadequacies and how we set up distance learning and IEPs for special needs children? We all know that right after March 13th, this was a huge one. Like, how do we provide that, online learning to special needs children? How do we do the IEPs? And there's some federal guidelines on this, and we all know that those are out there. They wanted you to continue with the IEPs. They want to make sure they're in place for the fall. You could do those remotely. And then they even talked about evaluation of students. And, if you could do the evaluations, yes. If you can't, then you got to make other provisions to get those done as well. So, can I or the district be held liable for remote learning rollouts that are not equitable for students across our community? This is huge that we've heard even since March 13th. And this deals with a couple different areas. One is computers. Do our kids have the computers and the devices? And I know at one hearing yesterday, I heard one superintendent talking about computers, that they're even trying to buy computers, and they're short supply of those right now. May not get those until September or October, because everybody's scrambling now to buy computers. So it's like toilet paper. We couldn't get toilet paper. Now we can't get computers. Exactly. The other one is internet connectivity and bandwidth. So even if you have internet, we know that there are pockets across Pennsylvania that bandwidth and that connectivity is very weak. And we've heard that people getting in their cars and driving to places just to get a hotspot for connectivity, and how do you do that long term with a family of 3 and parents working from home too?
And I've even heard of districts purchasing and distributing mobile hotspots, but there are parts of our state where even the mobile hotspot does not have strong enough reception for the student to be able to do the work they need to do.
And the last one under this one is instructional time. And that was an issue in the spring, but I think the state and their new guidelines have somewhat resolved this issue. There were pockets of parents complaining that their kids weren't getting enough instructional time. But now, as you know, with the state guidelines, we will have 180 days of school, and we will still have the 900, it was at 990, 990 hours, and schools need to take attendance and account for those instructional hours now. Before, it was as everybody was building this plane, they were a little laxed about that, but not so.
And I think the biggest difference here with instructional time is it used to be what I call butts and seats.
Yeah.
They had to be present in a classroom. Now it can you can include online learning in that.
Yeah. So here's another one. Can I be accused of not providing enough options to students, and can parents bring action against me? So the case here is what people are talking about in the full face-to-face is all the course offerings, especially at the secondary level, that are offered to kids. Everything from remediation all the way to enrichment, AP, and things like that. And if we were totally online, will my kids suffer because you don't have the instructors to provide that, or we don't have the bandwidth to provide that, or whatever the excuse will be? And if the same offerings are not provided online, can parents come back and say, that's a detriment to my child going forward? Interesting question.
Very
interesting question.
Yeah, and one that I'm sure the lawyers out there will love to jump on.
And I think I have a couple more here. Just a couple more. This is a good one. If I'm protected when a student gets hurt at school, why am I not protected if a student becomes injured via an infection? It's a new question that has propped up, thinking an infection is an injury. Yeah. So can we make the case that if we do our due diligence and safety to prevent accidents that happen at our school, making sure the glass in the doors and all that kind of stuff, and,
sure.
The playground, stuff like that, why doesn't it hold true with an infection?
Right, exactly.
And the final one for our members is this one. Can a superintendent use a principal's COVID-19 actions or inactions as a cause to initiate a job action against the principal? And is there any protection available? So, of course, from our organization, we would say you need to follow the district guidelines and the district plans and do everything under your power not to, go outside of those unless you get permission to do so, things like that. Sure. With the administrative team.
Yeah, and I think if you're asked to do something, can you be asked to cover an area? Can you be asked to do something? If you're not comfortable with it, the answer is yes, you can be asked, but you can also ask for proper training, for proper protective equipment to ensure that you remain safe. So we all know that we have healthcare workers that are out there in the line of fire, so to speak, every day, and they certainly are protected through their personal protective equipment, as well as the procedures and the training that they have.
Yeah. And these are just some of the questions right now, Eric, that are kind of popping up. I'm sure there's other liability questions, but I think it would behoove every principal to at least be thinking about some of these and maybe bringing it up at their administrative team to have a discussion. And where does the district stand on some of those? Hopefully, we're going to get some guidance and some legislation, either at the national or the state level, that will protect school districts from being sued if they do everything in their power to protect staff and students from COVID-19.
Right.
That's the best scenario that could come out of this.
Absolutely.
So speaking of national and state news, why don't we turn it over to you and talk about what's happening at the state and national level with some pending legislation or around COVID-19.
Sure, absolutely. Maybe you've heard in the news that there's a big debate between the Senate Republicans, the House Democrats over a funding bill for school reopening, really known as we'll just call it the HEALS Act, HEALS, no relation.
No relation, not named after me, but
the Senate Republicans have proposed a $70 billion funding for K-12 schools. It's a lot less than what our national organization, the Elementary Principals Organization, requested at $175 billion. The interesting thing about this $70 billion is how it will be used. So 1/3 of that $70 billion in this proposal will go directly to school districts, and it's about $23 billion. Now, think about $23 billion divided across all the school districts in the United States. And while it seems like a big number individually at the local level, it's probably pretty small. But the remaining 2/3, or about $46 billion, would be contingent. Now get this, be contingent on a district providing in-person instruction.
yeah, and I read that part and thought, wow, they're specific on what that means. So talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so that in-person instruction, that students have to be in the school, at least half of the students have to be in the school at a time for half of a week. So half a week to me means 2.5 days.
Correct.
And most of the hybrid models that we're seeing coming out from your school districts
2 days a week
are 2 days a week.
Right.
So they are dividing the students into an A-B group. So 50% will qualify, but they're 2 days online. I'm sorry, 2 days in person, 3 days online. So that'll be a big question. So all of a sudden, 2/3 of that amount of money, many of our school districts will be cut out of because they've either decided to go with an online option or a hybrid option that doesn't keep them in school half the
they
day.
kind of inadvertently define face-to-face instruction as well, right?
Yeah, yeah.
At 2.5 days.
2.5 days, right? So I think we know that this is going to be distributed. If this Senate proposal, again, it's just a proposal right now, if it goes through, it'll be distributed through the Title I Part A money. So you'll get some kind of a proportion similar to what you do with Title I. But this one, private school set aside. So right away, you have to provide a funding allotment, a portion of its funds equal to the percentage of students enrolled in private schools. So with Title money, normally with Title I money, it's that proportion of free and reduced lunch students that would qualify in a private school. Now they're saying just a proportion of all private schools. But this is significant and goes back to one of the liability issues you were talking about. There's no funding in here for home internet access. Very concerned about that. This is not a problem just across Pennsylvania, but across our nation. Next up, the negotiations on a final bill between the Democrats and the top Trump administration officials are ongoing. They want to reach an agreement. I heard this morning that the president said if an agreement's not reached, he'll take executive action. Have no idea what that means. I want to finish maybe with just one piece of good information. And this comes from NAESP, the Elementary Principals Association. Back in 2019, the Pew Research Center did a survey, and they asked the question why Americans don't fully trust many who hold positions of power and responsibility. Do you know that 84% of respondents think principals care about the students they serve, either some of the time or almost all of the time? Principals, get this, principals were rated above journalists, no surprise, above members of Congress, no surprise, and above technology leaders. And it reminds me of that old saying where I like my principal, but I don't trust principals
Right.
as a
It's
whole.
the whole Gallup poll thing about your schools too. My school's doing good, but I'm rating other schools less than mine. Right?
Exactly. So just know, as you're going through the struggle, that you are viewed highly, not just by us, but by your community and by the parents that you serve.
Yep. Thanks, Eric, for those updates. And again, we want to remind everyone, This recorded webinar will be on our site. If you want those questions, you can capture those from the webinar as well. And again, we're here to help you in any way. We're going to continue to scan the landscape either out of PD at the state or national level and bring you updates. So check back on our website very, very often because we're posting things daily right now in reference to COVID-19. And hang in there, everybody. And if you need us, we're only a phone call away. Thanks for joining us.
Stay well.
Thanks, Eric.